here,
Yes.
so I don't have to carry all of it.
Of course. And there is there is water as well.
I'm going to use this one because this
Sure.
is an
It
accident
would be
waiting to happen.
True. That's
These
true.
things are dangerous.
You're right. You're right. Erkek. Amerikalı, evet. Amerikalı erkek. Türkçe biliyor. Türkçe biliyor. Tamam. Geldiği zaman ben sana işaret ederim icabını. Muhterem hanımefendiler, muhterem beyefendiler, hoş geldiniz, sefa geldiniz tekrar.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to welcome you. Once again, I would like to declare the afternoon session open. My name is Can Günel Zülfikar. I would like to extend my gratitude.
Kendisinin profesörlüğü aslında çoktan geldi, yakında
Now, I would like to briefly inform you about Professor Juliane Hammer. Juliane Hammer is an expert in Islamic studies, is at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, at the Department of Religious Studies.
İstanbul Şubesi'nin kurduğu Kenan Rifai İslam Çalışmaları Kürsüsü'nün de hocasıdır.
Islamic studies.
UNC'de İslam Çalışmaları doktora programı Amerika'daki bir numaralı programdır efendim. Ve bu bölümden mezun olan herkes Amerika satında veya dünyada daima en iyi üniversitelerde hoca olurlar. Kenan Rifai Kürsüsü'nün ABD'deki bu bir numaralı İslami bilimler doktora programı hocası.
Islamic Studies PhD program.
Washington DC'de George
Her appointment at UNC Charlotte at Illinois University.
yürütmüştür. Sayın Hammer, Alman
As a fellow.
Üniversitesi İslam Çalışmaları bölümünde yüksek lisans ve doktorasını yapmıştır.
PhD,
2003
master's degree in Germany, in Washington D.C. George
Hristiyan
University, in the center. She worked, and at Princeton University, she worked as a guest lecturer. Her PhD dissertation was about the experiences of those who went back to Palestine and the Palestinians. During her studies of PhD, she stayed in Ramallah. The PhD dissertation is Palestinians born in diaspora and the search for a homeland, and it was published as a book by Texas University. And the following studies of Ms. Hammer address the issues of the Muslim women in America, Islamophobia, and also theory in Islamic studies. Islamic education, the social role of women, Sufism are of her subjects of study. American Muslim women, authority and activism, more than a prayer, is a breakthrough work, and it was published in 2012. I couldn't bring it, somebody borrowed it from me, but they didn't return it. So this is a call to whomever.
Yakında çıkacak Princeton Üniversitesi yayınlarından Huzurlu Aileler
University Publishing House, a new book called Peaceful Families, American Muslims' Efforts Against American Against Domestic Violence, will be soon published alongside her books. She also edited and many other books. Cambridge Companion to American Islam was published in 2013.
Jihad for Justice, Honoring the Work and Life of Amine Vedur isimli kitabını iki meslektaşım editörlüğünü yaparak yayınlamıştır. Ses getiren çok önemli makaleleri hem kitap bölümü olarak hem de hakemli dergilerde yayınlanmıştır. Onlardan bir tanesi alanın uzmanlarından Profesör Karl Ernst tarafından bu kitapta derlenmiştir ve Profesör Karl Ernst Cemal Nur hocamıza bu yazıyı Juliane'dan başka kimse yazamazdı diyerek anlatmışlardı. Bu kitapta kendisinin bir makalesi yer almaktadır. Hocamız çok velud, verimli bir akademisyen. Lisans ve lisansüstü öğrencilerini sağlam yetiştiren bir hocadır. Kendisi Almanya, Türkiye, Japonya, Fas gibi değişik ülkelerde, yerlerde konferanslar
ve she delivered presentations, made speeches, and also delivered lectures. She is at the same time at the programming committee of the American Religions Committee, and of course all over her.
Tasavvuf ve İslami dini uygulamalar gibi derslerinin yanı sıra İslam'a giriş, dünya dinleri ve küresel sorunlar hakkında da dersler vermiştir. Dersleri daima pek çok öğrencinin kaydolduğu favori dersler kategorisindedir. Bilhassa doktora talebeleri onu harika bir rehber olarak bilirler. Onunla doktora yapanlar bugüne kadar en sağlam İslam çalışmaları tahsilini aldıklarından doktoraları sonrasında araştırma bursları kazanmak ve iş bulmak konusunda da hep şanslı olmuşlardır. İslamofobya ve Müslüman aleyhtarı ırkçılık karşıtı etkin mücadelesiyle toplumda örnek bir entelektüel olarak rol oynar. Bendeniz elhamdülillah kendisiyle 2003 yılından beri arkadaşım. Onun dervişliğinin estetiğini, Sufice itinalarını, evlerinin bahçesinde ve çiçeklerinin düzenlenişinde tezahür ettiğine biz ailece şahidiz. Onlar ailece dostumuz oldukları için şeref aldığımız gayet kıymetli arkadaşım Doçent Doktor Juliane konferansını vermesi için şimdi uzun saygılarımla davet ediyorum.
So now I have to live up to that introduction. Not checking Facebook, I'm setting myself a timer. Okay. So, let me start by clarifying the title of this keynote speech, which is Discernable and Ineffable Reflections on the Academic Life of Sufism. And I want to start by thanking everyone, especially Jamal Hoja, especially Janguza, my friend, for inviting me to be here. I'm very honored to be here, and I feel the heavy weight of responsibility on my shoulders to say profound things for a little while. And what I want to do here, as you can see from the title, Reflections on the Academic Study of Sufism, is to think with you about the academic study of Sufism. Clearly, this is the purpose of this conference, but as you could already see in the earlier introductory speeches, there are significant differences in the way in which we think about the study of Sufism. And so I want to point out that the reflections that I can offer here draw on the academic study of Sufism in Europe and North America. And that is both a geographical limitation, but it's also an important reminder that we might not want to assume that all approaches to the study of Sufism are the same globally. So I was trained in Germany, as you've already heard, and have been working in the United States for the past 16 years. So this is a reflection on the past 25 years or so. And I would like to think of this as a talk, but also as an invitation, and that is as an invitation to compare notes, perhaps beyond Eurocentric and hegemonic frameworks for the academic study of anything, and specifically for the academic study of Islam and religion. I had similar thoughts last year at the conference in Kyoto that has already been mentioned this morning, about how complicated but also how very exciting it is to bring together last year Japanese, Turkish, and American scholars of Sufism to try and have a conversation. And I think we succeeded, but we also all noticed that there are significant differences, and these are something to talk about. So this is not a universal history, these are not universal genealogies, and they're also not universal debates necessarily. I want to start by telling you a very short story. I'm not a great storyteller, and this is not a full story, but once upon a time, many, many years ago, really many years ago, I created a research project for a specific fellowship at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. So this required thinking about the very vast holdings in the Library of Congress and coming up with something to do with these holdings that would convince people that I needed to get this fellowship to spend a year in Washington, D.C. So what I ended up doing was create a research project that would explore, so I wrote in my proposal, books in English in the holdings of the Library of Congress related to Sufism. Even then, this was quite some time ago, there were many, many more than I possibly could have looked at in a year. So, but what I did was I identified 3 particular types of books. One was studies of Sufism, both textual and anthropological. I will come back to that in a minute. The second kind I thought of as useful as a category was translations into English of Sufi texts from other languages. And the third one was what I thought of as primary Sufi texts that were originally written in English. So to cut a long story short, I was an alternate. I didn't get the fellowship. So I also didn't carry out the research project. But what strikes me as interesting after all these many years is that even then, I seem to have had an inclination and a desire to map and thereby order the literature in this field of the study of Sufism. And in some ways, that's still what I'm doing. I like mapping things, I like organizing things. I'm also willing to admit that some things can't be organized, but this is sort of the project that I'm engaging in here. What I also find interesting about the way I conceived of that fellowship project was that it was possible, I assumed back then, that this literature in English could be easily divided into what scholars in religious studies think of as insider and outsider categories. So the insider-outsider debate in Islamic studies as well as in religious studies is central in the ways it shapes our discussions about methodology. We have still conversations after a decade of religious study, no, not a decade, a century of religious studies in the United States, discussions about who can study religion and what that has to do with whether they're themselves religious people and belong to particular religious traditions or don't. And so this insider-outsider binary often appears in other forms, for example, as the distinction between analytical and descriptive, between normative and prescriptive and analytical, normative and descriptive. And so I would argue that there's both a whole lot of politics at work there, but there's also an issue with being stuck in that binary. And so one of the things I've learned over many years in religious studies is that it's always suspicious when things fit so easily into 2 categories. And so scholars in our field have for a long time now argued that there are no clean boundaries between insiders and outsiders, and that we in some ways are always insiders and in other ways always outsiders to our subject of study. So perhaps a better question might be, what motivates us to study Sufism. Why are we doing it? And I would say, I'm going to assume just with the people in the room, that we would have very different answers to that question. And I will come back to that point because I think that is actually also a political point. So the academic study of Sufism in a North American and European context has a long history. And I'm still trying to map here. I came up with 4 basic categories that I think are helpful to think about what we're actually studying and how we're doing it. So the first one is the vast set of materials in textual studies. Those are both analytical and critical textual studies. A second important piece is critical editions and translations. Those are not necessarily analytical. I think there is a distinction to be made here in terms of method. The third one is, broadly speaking, historical studies, and the fourth is ethnographic and anthropological studies. So what these 4 categories, and they're certainly not exhaustive, what these point us to, I think, is a set of tools and methods that we have available to us in our toolbox. So textual and historical studies both rely on archives, not only on texts, but on various types of archives. So I like to think about ways in which we can expand the archive beyond what we initially think of as texts. So examples of various kinds of artifacts, architectural structures, music. Those are all archival materials that are not necessarily immediately textual. And we rely in those textual and historical studies on languages. And my late father was a linguist, so I grew up with conversations about linguistic theory at the dinner table. Some more complicated than others, but I've spent a lot of time in my life thinking about language. And I think language is an interesting connection between textual studies and ethnographic and anthropological studies. So to think about what kinds of access language gives us and knowledge of languages, I think is an important point to consider. So in what follows, which is the actual sort of core of the talk, I want to talk about 3 things: texts, politics, and gender. The third one is no surprise to anyone who's ever met me. There is no talk I can give that doesn't talk about gender in some way. I just can't help it. So you're going to have to sit through that part. But I will start with texts and make some really basic observations. So clearly texts of various kinds in many different languages, written down, preserved in archives and libraries, are central to historical studies. But they're also an access point for studying ideas, thoughts, discourses, and occasionally even historical practices. So this question of discourses and practices has come up a couple of times already. And one of the things that I've always thought of once I started thinking about it as a great irony in the academic study of Sufism is the fact that Sufis, the people we are studying, had a rather ambivalent relationship with texts, right? So in the study of religion, at least in the US context, and in the study of Islam, as well as in the study of Sufism, I think there is something that some people would describe as text fetishism, so a kind of text, or if we wanted to be a little bit more careful, a kind of text positivism, the idea that texts have truth in them that we can access, and all we need to do is try really hard, and then we can access that truth. And so Sufis, historically, were suspicious about texts for a number of reasons, and theorized about the pitfalls and limitations of texts. So for one, oral teachings were considered much more significant than written materials. That has both something to do with the fact that the majority of average Muslims, I don't know, average Mohammeds, probably couldn't read, and certainly couldn't read Sufi treatises, but I think it also says something about the sort of discomfort that Sufi teachers had with relying on the text to convey meaning. Some of that has to do with the fact that those treatises, those materials that were written down, were written in time periods and in places where there was great opposition to Sufism, both in theory and in practice. And so writing Sufi texts required obscure and specialized terminology that hid certain meanings from certain people. And lastly, I think it's important to come back to language here. Sufi writers and oral teachers both recognize that there are limits to what language can communicate about mystical concepts and experiences. And so the fact that we base the majority of our studies of Sufism on text is not a reflection of Sufi practice historically. Now, of course, I recognize that text is all we have in some ways, but I think we need to stay aware of the ways in which these texts functioned in their context in order to do two things. I think there are two main things that we can do with Sufi texts. One is to use them for meaning making in our contemporary moment. Texts certainly lend themselves to that. And the other purpose, the second sort of big piece, I think, is to try and understand what those texts might have meant to people in the past. And those two are not the same purpose. That also seems significant to me. And there's sort of the technical aspect. I'm not a specialist in archives, and I know Professor Mahmoud Errol talked earlier about Sufi texts in Ottoman and how important it is to study them. It is worth pointing out that there are many, many, many manuscripts in Turkish libraries that have never been accessed, that have never been cataloged, and that certainly might hold really interesting information about the past, but they also have to be recognized as part of an archive that we don't have anymore. So in other words, the texts that do survive extant manuscripts and materials always were part of a broader discursive landscape that we don't have access to anymore, right? So sometimes we know that texts existed that don't anymore, but sometimes we don't even know that. And so we cannot recreate the discursive and textual landscape of the past. We need to create our own in some ways. And I want to come back to the question of language and perhaps say something about the ways in which I think it is possible to expand the possibilities of language. So rather than to think of languages, even in the plural, only related to texts, what about the language of the body? What about the language of music? What about talking artifacts? And so there are possibilities beyond texts themselves, and at least one of the many graduate students in the audience, I hope one day will write a book about the languages of Sufism beyond, you know, Persian, Arabic, Ottoman, Turkish, maybe English, maybe German, but those are not all the languages that I'm talking about. Okay. So my second point has to do with the politics of the study of Sufism, the very specific European and American politics. And I rely here in part on the work of colleagues like Karl Ernst, who's already been mentioned. He's always kind of present in the room. He's my colleague at UNC. And also the work of Marcia Hermansen at Loyola University, who both have spent quite some time analyzing the history and the politics of the study of Sufism, including questions of terminology. So Karl Ernst has in his introduction to Sufism an entire chapter that discusses both the history of the study of Sufism in Europe and America, and pages and pages of discussions about where the word Sufi comes from and what it might mean. So rather than limiting it to one particular possibility, he points out that there's always been a debate about that, both an academic European and American debate, but also an earlier actual debate among Sufis and among Muslims about this terminology. And the study of Sufism that I'm talking about here has a a genealogy that is closely connected to colonialism and to Orientalist European ideas about the Muslim other, including in sort of bullet points a rather deep and a little bizarre interest in the most extreme bodily practices. So early European travelers who later became colonizers and colonial administrators were looking for the most extreme things they could find when they were traveling, and they attached those to the idea of Sufism rather than certain ideas. There was an unwillingness, more so than an inability, I would argue, to recognize Sufism as part of Islam. So they had sort of studied Islam in a variety of ways, had encountered it in practical forms, and when they encountered these extreme practices, they couldn't figure out a way to make those go together. And so there were all kinds of debates about where Sufism actually comes from. None of the answers was from within Islam. That was just not possible. So some thought it came from Hinduism and from India, some thought it came from Christian and Jewish mysticism, but it wasn't possible for them, for these scholars, to recognize certain practices as both Sufi and Muslim. We've come a long way from that. I'm not sure that we've necessarily come to a better place. So one of the issues with the academic study of Sufism that I see is that it's utilized for very specific political purposes in the US context. That's not in itself a problem. I will argue until I'm blue in the face that all academic endeavors are inherently political, and that not being willing to acknowledge that our work is political doesn't make the political aspects go away. That doesn't absolve us from the responsibility of thinking about that. In fact, I think that's a very important part of our work, to think about, to acknowledge that there are political circumstances and a political significance, and to perhaps be intentional about the directionality of that political work that we do. So you can find a host of academic writings in English that talk about Sufism now as opposed to 150 years ago as the heart of Islam, the soul of Islam. Those are probably the most popular. And that kind of literature, which is clearly making some kind of political statement, is often positioned as an antidote to quote-unquote radical, extremist, fundamentalist, in short, political forms of Islam and Muslim movements. So Sufis are the good guys, and fundamentalists are the bad guys. Again, binaries are dangerous to begin with, but what that, of course, completely overlooks, or I would argue deliberately ignores, is the fact that Sufis and Sufi thinkers, as well as Sufi communities and tariqas, have always been politically entangled in a variety of ways. There are many examples of institutional involvement, anything from ruler patronage, which was very common for certain tariqas and certain tekkas, to the fact that some Sufi orders actively participated in anti-colonial struggles in their countries. That's certainly not apolitical and otherworldly, right? So if you participate in the struggle against French colonialism, you're very much in this world and and concerned about issues of this world. So I think that this emphasis on Sufis as apolitical and peaceful and otherworldly is one way of telling Muslims to stay out of politics. And it gets perhaps more sinister when Sufis become the only good and moderate Muslims, because that in turn, and that is very acute at the moment, I think in the United States, has a long history but is in a sort of very acute place right now. It makes it easier to identify bad Muslims and then justify quote-unquote bad Muslims. I don't think they're bad Muslims. And makes it possible to surveil and persecute them because they are perceived and represented as bad. And then Sufis are held up as examples of good Muslims because they don't do that. My third point has to do with gender in the study of Sufism. Again, There is no way. I can't talk about that. Gender studies has been at the center of most of my work in the past 2 decades. And while some might argue that even thinking about gender within and related to Sufism is somewhat anachronistic because gender is clearly a modern category, I would argue that we have introduced all kinds of modern categories in the academic study of anything, and so this isn't very different from the other ones. I do want to say, because it is worth pointing that out, that studying gender in Sufism is not the same as studying women in Sufism. It's an important piece, but in case you didn't know, men are gendered too and can be studied as gendered beings. So what I mean by gender studies is not politically neutral either. So what I'm thinking of here is feminist scholarship that aims to analyze patriarchal pasts. That analysis is always critical of these patriarchal pasts, and there's always an element in feminist scholarship of developing ideas and practices that can change patriarchal structures and establish what I like to call gender justice. And that clearly is a very this-worldly proposition, right? So the gender justice is not for the next world. Inshallah, it's already there. But is for this world, and so it requires work and requires struggle. So scholars have for many years now, I would say, looked for, to, and into Sufi women, both through their writings. So there are some extant writings by Sufi women, but they've also very carefully studied writings by men about women and writings by male Sufis and what they might have thought about gender and gender issues. Now, you might wonder whether there is some kind of picture that emerges from these studies. It's still a relatively small part of the academic study of Sufism, but there is a significant body of literature. And not surprisingly, when scholars get to talking, they don't agree about stuff. So some of the sort of main pieces that have emerged would include things like some scholars of women and Sufism in particular have argued that Sufi women were curtailed and limited in their activities and experiences as Sufis because the societies they lived in were patriarchal, and Sufi practices are as influenced by patriarchal practices as the rest of society. Others have argued that it is within Sufism that women gain authority, gain access to a somewhat less gendered world, and that it becomes possible to transcend gender altogether. And some of that scholarship also has looked to Sufi women in particular as role models for women today. So gender certainly matters in some ways. Gender matters is a catchphrase that needs to go in every talk. I want to highlight here the work of a great scholar and a good friend of mine, Sadia Sheikh, who has described in a book that is called Sufi Narratives of Intimacy, who describes her engagement with the writings of Ibn Arabi, who's already come up a couple of times here, as a conversation with him rather than a mining or reinterpretation of his works. So I want to point out that there is this really interesting qualitative difference between saying, let's take a medieval text and make it work for us today. So Ibn Arabi maybe was a very nice man. He had women teachers. I don't know if he was a nice man. I have no idea. There is no way of knowing. He wrote about women teachers. He seems to have had great respect for women, but he was also a patriarchal guy in his time and a man of his time. And so Sadia Sheikh, who self-identifies as a Muslim feminist scholar, says instead of reading something into or out of Ibn Arabi, what I'm doing is I'm having a 21st century conversation with Ibn Arabi. And some of the ideas are not his, they're mine, but this conversation is inspired by some of these older ideas. So there's a particularly, I think, rich possibility here, and perhaps a model for other kinds of engagements with these texts. I also want to add, while we're on the issue of gender, that the focus in ethnographic and textual studies, as well as textual, but especially ethnographic studies, on experience and practice that Professor Khalil already brought up earlier today, is something that I, in my own methodology, link to feminist theory. So feminists have written extensively and have thought very carefully about experience as a category or as an archive for knowledge production, something other than ideas, and have in fact criticized that male-centric notions of knowledge and intelligence seem to privilege the mind over the heart and the body. And so this feminist practice of looking at experience, I think, is in interesting ways reflected in at least some ethnographic work. One question that I'm left with has to do with the boundaries of language, spoken and written. So can we actually, as academics, draw on something other than various languages in order to both study other people's ideas and practices and write about our own ideas and practices? So do we have anything else available to ourselves? And I'm hoping to come away from this conference with some better answers and ideas to that. I have been advising graduate students in the PhD program, yes, the #1 in America, for 7 years now, and I have to tell you, I have learned that students have the best ideas. They're much less afraid of the system shutting them down. And I learn as much, if not more, from my students as I think they, or I hope they learned from me. So where does this all leave us? Let me tell you another story. Last summer, my family and I, so my husband, my 2 daughters who were 10 and 13, almost 10 and almost 13 at the time, were here in Istanbul, like we are every summer. And so we had decided that we were going to visit the ecumenical patriarchate of Istanbul as a sort of educational opportunity. While we were in the car driving there, as usual, stuck in traffic. You all have no idea what I'm talking about, I know. Istanbul traffic, so we're sitting in traffic. We're pretty close, and so my husband says, look, the patriarchy is over there. So patriarchate is a really hard word to say, and so Jamil, my husband, had sort of a hard time, and so he said, look, the patriarch is over there. There's a short pause in the car, and then my daughter said, Baba, the patriarchy is everywhere. I didn't teach her that. Had nothing to do with it. So since then, the patriarchy is everywhere has become sort of a running joke in my family and among my friends. It works really well in all kinds of situations, it turns out. And even though that's not a good thing, right? So this is a particular type of gallows humor, perhaps. When I was thinking about this talk that I was going to give here, I thought to myself, there's an interesting parallel that I want to end with, which is that Sufism is also everywhere. And that's a better thing than the fact that the patriarchy is everywhere, which I hope is not always going to be the case. I don't want to, get rid of Sufism at all. I do want to point out that at no point in this talk I tried to define Sufism. And so what I want to end with is some thoughts on the boundaries of Sufism. So in the many classes I teach on various aspects of Islam, including a specialized course on Sufism, I've come to tell my students, and they don't necessarily like it, but I've come to tell my students that I think the best way to describe Sufism is to describe it as permeating the fabric of Muslim societies, past and present. I like that. I haven't come up with a garden metaphor, even though I'm a better gardener than textile producer. But Sufism permeates the fabric of Muslim societies, past and present. What that means, I think, is that it's hard, if not impossible, to draw boundaries around Sufism as a phenomenon. And I'm concerned that a good bit of the study of Sufism has been trying to do just that, rather than questioning these boundaries as soon as they are established. And I think our job is to look for Sufism in all things and everywhere. And as the Americans say, the more the merrier, right? So there are so many more ways that we could study Sufism if we didn't spend so much time trying to define what it is and then decide what it isn't. There is a lot of scholarship in sort of in Islamic, as part of Islamic studies, that will endlessly debate whether someone was a philosopher or a Sufi or a legal scholar. And I always come out of these conversations sort of wondering why it is so hard to accept that they might have been all three, and not even in a sort of, he was a legal scholar in the morning, did philosophy around lunchtime, and was a Sufi in the evening kind of way, but rather that these are actually all interconnected things that people did. And I think the academic study of Sufism should be, like the entire academic project, at least to me, dialogical. And I mean something very specific by that. I want to read to you something that Professor Ernst and I now write in a sort of standardized email. Every time we get an email from someone who wants to apply to our PhD program, we have an email that we send back to them with useful links, basic information, so we don't have to write it over and over again. And there's a paragraph in that email that reads something like this. We understand from your email that X, whatever it is the subject of your main interest, and it could indeed be the subject of the analytical studies as part of a PhD program in religious studies. Beyond the subject area, however, we would like to hear about the scholarly theories and categories that would be the vehicles for your academic work. In your application essay, it would be extremely important to demonstrate your engagement with contemporary scholarship in religious studies. What are the models that animate your thinking? Who are you arguing against? The admissions committee will want to know how you would function in terms of the field of religious studies. And so what is central to me for the academic study of religion is engaging with other scholars, past and present. I don't think we should have yet another project that just reads a text without acknowledging that other people have already read that text and have already had ideas about it. So there's a dialogical, contemporary quality to that work. And I think we need to reflect together, and I hope that we can do that here at this conference, on methods, purpose, and the politics of our work. And so perhaps rather than trying harder to define Sufism, it might be that there's an ocean of possibilities, and that the study of Sufism, basically at this point, as far as I can see, has unlimited potential. Thank you. Oh, there's something happening? Yeah.
Due to technical difficulties the university is experiencing, we're going to give a 10-minute break. Teknik arızadan dolayı 10 dakikalık bir ara vereceğiz efendim. Ondan önce Cemal Nur Sargut hocamız inşallah Juliane Hammer'a bir şilt takdim verecekler. Lütfen. You didn't crash the system.
I did.
Patriarchy.
Oh,
Cemal Nur will give you...
okay, I said it one too many times. It's all about the computer.
Amerika'da hocamın adını açan büyük hocalardan biri. Gerçekten o kadar çok seviliyor ve beğeniliyor ki çok tahmin dahi edemediğiniz kişiler. Amerika'daki meşhur yazar, Müslüman yazarlar kendisinden doktora almak için sıra bekliyorlar. Çok büyük hizmetleri var. Hocamın üzerinde duası var. Ve bunu vermekle ben hakikaten çok büyük bir mutluluk duyuyorum bana nasip olduğu için ona. Teşekkür ediyorum Juliane.
Pazartesi, salı, çarşamba, perşembe, cuma. Pazartesi, salı, çarşamba, perşembe, cuma. Ses.
Şu anda açıkmış.
Efendim merhabalar tekrar. Good afternoon everybody. Açılış paneliyle sempozyumumuza başlıyoruz inşallah efendim. We will now begin with the opening panel of the symposium, chaired by Dr. Juliane Hammer. If I could please have our participants come up to the stage, and then we shall begin. Tamam.
Okay, hello and welcome. Thank you for still being here for our first actual panel with actual panelists and presentations. I understand that my main task here is to keep time, and I'm very good at that. So without further ado, so we don't waste any time, let me present to you Banu Büyükcıngıl and ask her to present her paper. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hammer. Benim tebliğimin başlığı Görmedi Göz ile, Kemâlî Gördü Aşk ile. Bu tebliğde sorduğum soru şöyle.
Kemâlî so by love. So
şair Osman Kemâlî Hazretleri'nin divanını inceleyip ama olması hasebiyle basiret kavramının incelenmesiydi. Bu hususta aşk ve basiret arasında Kemâlî Efendi'nin divanında belirgin bir bağ olduğunu hissettim. Kendisini mezar taşında yazan ve hayatını özetleyen bir şiirle başlamak istiyorum.
Which I would like to start with.
Her şey fena, bakidir Allah. Haktır, Muhammed'dir hem Resulullah. Ben Aliyaba'nın kıtmiriydim. 1862 yılında Erzurum'un Güllü köyünde dünyaya geldi. 1,5 yaşında geçirdiği çiçek hastalığından dolayı gözlerini kaybetmiştir. Fakat bu kaybediş ona engel olmamış. Onun öğrenme aşkı, Kur'an'ı, Hafız ve Fuzuli'nin divanını ve Mesnevi'yi hıfzetmiştir. Aynı zamanda bir yandan da medrese eğitimini tamamlamıştır. Kendi ifadesine göre yüzünü görmediği bir sevgi olduğu, mecazi aşka düştüğünden bahseder. Ve Şettari kolundan Kolası Ali Rıza Efendi ile bir zatla tanışıp onun sohbetlerine devam eder. Bu sohbetler sonunda mecazi aşkı ilahi aşka dönüşmüştür. Ve bu aşk ile yana yana 28 yaşında Erzurum'dan çıkıp Orta Doğu'nun muhtelif yerlerine seyahatlere çıkmıştır. Bu uzun süren yolculuklardan sonra Konya Mevlevihanesi'ne gitmiş. Burada bir süre ikamet etmiştir. Ve burada kendisine Mesnevihanlık icazeti verilmiş ve Mevlevi sikkesi giydirilmiştir. 1901'de İstanbul'a gelmiş, çeşitli işler yapmış. Takriben 1905 yılında bir arkadaşının, bir dostunun mürşidi olan Eyüp'te Hamzavi Melami Şeyhi Abdülkadir Belli Hazretleri'ni ziyarete gitmiştir arkadaşı. Osman Kemâlî de avluda otururken bir anda 19 yıl önce gördüğü bir rüyayı hatırlar. Ve bu rüya aynen tezahür eder. Kapı açılır ve dışarıya o zamanın Hamzavi Melami Şeyhi olan Abdülkadir Belli Hazretleri dışarı çıkar ve Osman Kemâlî Hazretleri kendisine intisap eder. O gün girdiği dergâhtan 2 yıl sonra çıkmasına izin verilir ve şeyhinin vefatına kadar 18 yıl kendisine hizmet eder. Osman Kemâlî'ye Meclis-i Meşayih tarafından Fatih'te bir tekkeye şeyhlik teklif edilmiş. Fakat o mürşidine hizmeti tekke şeyhliğine tercih etmiştir ve bu teklifi reddetmiştir. Kendisinin Hamzavi Melami terbiyesine yetişmesinin yanı sıra Rumeli Melamiliğinin piri olan Nurul Arabi Hazretlerinden de silsilesinden de icazet almıştır. Böylece Hamzavi Melami ve Rumeli Melamiliğini kendinde birleştirmiştir. Kendisinin ifadesine göre 20 yaşındayken şiir söylemeye başlamış. Fakat tasavvufi şiirleri 40 yaşında söylemeye başlamıştır. Divanından oluşan Aşk Sızıntıları adlı bir eseri ve sohbetlerinin toplanmasından oluşan İrfan Sızıntıları adlı mensur bir eseri vardır. Kalplere hala tesirini sürdüren Osman Kemâlî Hazretleri 8 Ocak 1954 yılında vefat etmiştir. Osman Kemâlî Hazretleri ama olması hasebiyle dünyayı maddi gözüyle değil iç gözüyle görmüş bir ariftir. Bu yüzden öncelikle kısaca basiret kavramını anlatmak istedim ben. Basar Allah'ın subuti sıfatlarından biridir ve görmek demektir. Kullardaki tecellisine basiret denir. Basiret hem kafa gözüyle görmek hem de kalp gözüyle görmek demektir. Yani bir şeyi iç gözle bakmak demektir. Kur'an'da çeşitli ayetlerde basiret geçmektedir. Kur'an'da görmeni anlamanın yanı sıra hakikati anlama, doğru yolu bulma anlamlarında kullanılmıştır. Örneğin Bakara 7. ayette, 9. ayet, 17. ayette, Yasin 9'da ve Araf 179'da geçer. Osman Kemâlî Hazretlerinin divanına bakılacak olursa, kendisi Allah'a aşk ile varmış ariflerden biridir. Aşk yolunu seçmiştir Allah'a varmak için. Ve aynı zamanda da basiret ve aşk arasında kendi hayatına bakınca da bir ilişki olduğunu görüyoruz. Bunu şiirsel bir dille anlatmıştır. Öncelikle Osman Kemâlî der ki bize bir
First he says you should find a murshid.
Bunu içip
You can
yola çık.
the right love from your murshid. That's how you can.
Belki 40 sene medresede ilim tahsil etmektense bir dakika insanın vaki olmayı daha hayırlı buldum der. Burada da ilk şu anda
that comes from your murshid in 1 minute.
olarak
So
it's actually
of love, and the castle of ego is destroyed by your murshid.
bir aşk hücre-i dervişi kıldı Ravza-i cennet bana. Yani bir mürşit,
That is to say,
küçücük bir derviş hücresi cennet bahçesine çevirir der. Daha sonrasında da Osman Kemâlî bize şöyle der, bu baş gözüyle Allah'ın görülemeyeceğini, eğer bir şey görüyorsan da baş gözüyle, bu ancak senin vehmin, senin zannındır der ve şöyle devam eder.
an assumption, but nothing else. You can't see hak with your eye of your head. Whatever you see,
Burada da
the rule is, if you want to see God the truth, first you have to get rid of your ego.
ahlak-ı Muhammedi giyinmekle olur. Eğer aradan çekersen göreceğin haktır der. Ama eğer çekmezsen göreceğin ancak kendi vehmindir der. Bir başka beyitte de kulun kalbinin Allah'ın evi olduğunu söyler. Eğer bunun farkında değilse ama olduğunu söyler. Bu hususta da Yunus Emre şöyle der bize. Gönül çalabın tahtı aynı manadadır.
So, exactly the same meaning.
ruhunu olarak değerlendirir Osman Kemâlî. Bir ayette de bu dünyadan
72nd da those who are
maddi
here in this earth will also be.
Şöyle devam eder Osman Kemâlî. Kalbinin beyti hüda olduğunu bilmeyenin kalbi amadır. Anın nurlar ona nirandır der. Bir yandan da Osman Kemâlî hemen bir tavsiyede bulunur. Eğer hakkı görmüyorsan o zaman görüyormuş gibi yap der. Çünkü o seni görür. Hak seni görür. Sen de ona göre davran der. Onu düşün, onu fikret der. Ve şöyle devam eder. Hakkı gör, her şeyde ben gör, şüphesiz bil. Hakkı fikretmek ibadet.
So, to be contemplating on God the truth.
Kavramını anlatmak istiyorum. Aşk kelimesi Arapçada ış kelimesinden gelmiştir. Ve asıl kökü aşakadır. Aşaka sarmaşık demektir. Nasıl ki bir sarmaşık ağacı sarınca soldurur, ilahi aşk da insanın benliğini sardığı zaman onu soldurur ve nefsinden arındırır. Bu sebepten Osman Kemâlî şöyle der bize. Aşktır hayvanı insan eyleyen insanı nur, bu rumuzatın basiret ehline pinhanı yok. Yani bu sırrın basiret ehline, hakikati görenlere bir sır olmadığını söyler ve eğer aşkı giyinirsek o zaman benliğimizden kurtulacağımız
they get rid of their ego, their nefs, the animal soul, and the castle of the animal soul will collapse. Ahmet Ghazali also says regarding the letters of aşk, of course, Sufis have different interpretations. Ahmet Ghazali's way of explaining aşk is very similar to that of Kemâlî's. Ayn, Shin, Kaf are the three letters. Ayn and Shin refers to aşk. Kaf refers to heart. Aşk starts by seeing. First the lover sees and then approaches Shin and drinks the wine of love and becomes drunk, and this drunkenness makes you close to your beloved Allah, and then you don't remain and you see only Allah, and that is only possible through Kaf. So Kemâlî always see things through the eye, through his interior eye. And Ali Rıza Efendi's discourses also made him flourish his love. And later on, Abdülkadir Belhi Hazretleri enabled his love to reach its climax. And this is Kaf. So that's what he says in poems. Everywhere, aşk is with me. I wouldn't know that. Allah would make me see everything, and I'm not blind. I have the foresight. So he actually refers to his sheikh saying, around the area of Eyüp, in another verse, Kemâlî couplets, he says that it's thanks to his murshid, he was able to get rid of his nefs and was able to die before death. And the heart's eye was opened. So Osman Kemâlî, the universe has become a verse for him. Everything has become a sign for him. So he has started to be able to read through these signs, read between the lines, between the signs, and everything has become a sign. In another couplet, he says, Elhamdulillah, my eyes are blind, but whatever I see the face of the beloved. And he witnesses Allah, his beloved, everywhere. So there is only lover and love everywhere. here he says that he has been able to attain the ocean of unity, and he has melted in it, and there is not even a beloved or a lover, and he was able to attain the Kaf mountain, which is the ultimate goal. Osman Kemâlî is now in the ocean of unity, oneness, and there was no seer and there was nothing seen. So as the gnostics are annihilating their bodies, whatever is seen through them is the haqq, is God, the truth. So if I wrap up, Osman Kemâlî's connection between love and foresight is very prominent. So the more divine love you have, the more foresight, discernment one has. And through this path, you can progress in your Seyri Suluk, in your spiritual journey. And in the future studies that I would like to make, I would also like to research the idea, the concept of Basira with other notions in his works. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Banu, also for keeping
Teşekkür ederim.
perfect timing. And I think it's also worth pointing out how beautiful it is that it is, in fact, a student from this institute here at Üsküdar University that opens the student presentations. So thank you, Banu. Our second speaker is Waliullah Kavusi, who is a PhD student at the University of Tehran.
Thank you. I would like to...
Oh, yeah, sure.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. Benim adım Valiullah Kavusi. Tehran Üniversitesi'nde İslam sanatı tarihi bölümünde
Tehran University at the Department of Islamic History. I'm a PhD student, and I am very much happy to be present in this conference.
I would like to thank the organizers for kindly inviting me to this important event. I am particularly pleased to make a discussion regarding the flourishing of construction of Sufi shrine during Ilkhanid period Iran. The case of Sheikh Abdus Samad shrine complex at Natanz, Iran. One of the most architectural group of monuments built in Islamic Iran are the little holy cities. They were erected for the most part in the early 14th century. A certain uniformity of style and purpose pervades the group. The high quality of the decoration and the spirit of invention in the architecture marked the period as one of the most brilliant in this field of endeavor. The shrine in question are all of Sufi inspiration. In this respect, they constitute a group to be distinguished from the great holy cities, for example, Qom and Mashhad, which have a Shiite origin. The genesis and historical development of Shiite sanctuaries is a subject will call for separate investigation. But the general observation can be made that their greatest spurt of growth occurred in the late Seljuk period and then again in Safavid and Qajar time. From among the many Sufi cult centers that were built at this time, 5 stand out as the most brilliant and best preserved example of the type. 1, the shrine of Bayazid at Bastam. 2, the complex of Sheikh Ahmad at Torbat Sheikh Jam. 3, the Pir Bakran near Isfahan. 4, the shrine of Sheikh Safi, ancestor of the Safavid at Ardabil. And 5, the shrine of Abdus Samad at Natanz. 1, Bastam. Sheikh Abu Yazid or Bayazid Tayfur ibn Isa, whose tomb is at Bastam, was not a contemporary of Abdus Samad, Sheikh Safi, or the Pir Bakran. He died around 875. Pre-Mongol structure on the site of the ensemble at Bastam are much more in evidence. The complex containing Sheikh's tomb is an architectural pastiche of the early 14th century in which remnants of earlier cult buildings, including a Seljuk minaret, were pieced together with new ones. This work, done largely by a single architect, ranges between 1299 and 1313. The complex which contained the tomb of Bayazid is basically a courtyard with Ayvan and a structure around. The Sheikh's tombs lie in a hazira, a fenced-in plot slightly elevated. This type of platform burial was preferred by persons who adhered to the prohibition in the hadith against burial in a mausoleum. Directly behind the Sheikh's hazira is an Ayvan, emphasizing the emplacement of the Sheikh's tomb architecturally without actually covering it. Similar Ayvan occur at other shrine compounds which are based on the hazira type of tomb. The most peculiar structure in this complex is the long corridor, now serving as the entrance of the courtyard. According to Matla' Shams, it was the entrance to a khanqah. 2. It's the mihrab of the shrine of Bayazid Bastami at Bastam, with a Quranic inscription in Sol's script, Sulus Hat. Another inscription in the shrine of Sheikh Bayazid at Bastam with Quranic inscription. Two, Torbat Sheikh Jam, Like Sheikh Bayazid, Sheikh Ahmad belongs to the pre-Mongol history of Sufism. He died in 1141, and although he left a large progeny, nothing seemed to have been built at his tomb until the first year of Mongol rule in Khorasan. Like the shrine of Bayazid, his shrine grew up around a hazira. The most peculiar structure in this complex is the long corridor. The first building on the site was a simple domed funerary mosque erected in 1236, but it was during the 14th century when the shrine of Bastam, Ardebil, Pir Bakran and Bastam were being built that the shrine came to life. The building which surround the early mosque all grew up within a period of some 40 years between 1302 and 1362. These included khanaqah, madrasa, chapels, and a peculiar cruciform artery with galleries. As in the previous cases, it was the family of the sheikh that sponsored the expansion of the cult. 3. The Pir Bakran shrine near Isfahan. The shrine of the Pir Bakran near Isfahan enjoyed a somewhat less brilliant history. It was built at the size of an earlier mausoleum where the sheikh had held his majlis. In 1299, his devotees provided him with a beautifully decorated Ayvan shelter that became his place of burial in 1303. Certain modifications to the Ayvan were made over a period of about 10 years. The bays along the side of the Ayvan were enclosed to form rooms. This is the only evidence we have for the vitality of the cult after the death of the sheikh, presumably after this promising start. The cult declined as a living institution and survived only a revered tomb. Finally, it is interesting to note that one of the earliest examples of inscription naming the 12 imams is found in one of the panels from the Ayvan of the Pir Bakran. For Ardebil, the shrine of Sheikh Safi at Ardebil consists of a series of courtyards surrounded by corridors and chambers culminating in the great courtyard of the shrine where the mausoleum of the Sheikh is found. Although the Sheikh died in 1335, it has long been thought that the creation of a shrine complex took place only with the accession of the Safavid to power. Recent research in the field has shown that the core of the complex was built at the time of the Sheikh's death, and there are indications that something existed here before, probably the Sheikh's own Zawiyah. So, as in the case of Natanz, the shrine developed around a building which was already celebrated to some extent before the death of the Sheikh. Similarly, upon the transformation of the Sheikh's tomb into a shrine, new institution rapidly grew up around it. the shrine of Sheikh Abdus Samad at Natanz. The exact date of the death of Sheikh Abdus Samad ibn Ali al-Isfahani is not recorded. He flourished during the late 13th, early 14th century. The shrine centered around his mausoleum was built at Natanz between the years 1304 and 1325, allegedly by one of his own devotees. The shrine included the mausoleum of Sheikh, a 4A1 mosque with domed sanctuary, a cistern in the middle of its courtyard, a khanqah, a minaret, corridors and vestibule connecting the various parts of the complex, and formerly, according to local report, a madrasa. The patrons involved came from two distinct social classes. The mosque, mausoleum, and khanqah were built by an official representative of the Ilkhanid court, the Sahib al-Azam, the Wazir, Khalifat ibn Ali ibn al-Hussein al-Mastari. The Sadr al-Muazzam, Shamsuddin Muhammad ibn Ali al-Natanzi, whose name appears on the mosque and khanqah portal, would seem to represent the local Sufi order. As a final comment on the shrine of Natanz, one may draw attention to the square Kufic inscription on the khanqah portal containing the credo, "There is no God but Allah. Muhammad is his prophet, and Ali is the wali of Allah." This sheathed version of the declaration of faith would seem out of place on a Sufi shrine, but we shall see that this was not an isolated case. As a final comment on the shrine of Natanz, one may draw attention to the Esquire Kufic. The 15 inscription in Sheikh Abdus Samad's shrine show that 4 categories of people were involved in the construction of the shrine complex at Natanz. The Sufi Sheikh, who was buried in the tomb around which a building are clustered. The patrons who sponsored the work, the local overseers who supervised the work, and the craftsmen who did the work. These 4 types are cross-section of Ilkhanid society and show how personal bonds and economic ties affected architectural enterprise. They illustrated many of the main trends in Ilkhanid society, such as the acceptance and legitimation of Sufi order, the increasing reverence toward Ali felt by Sunnis, and that transfer of people and resources throughout the empire. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last speaker on this panel is Micah Hughes, who is a PhD student at UNC Chapel Hill and who happens to also be my advisee, and so is under no pressure at all right now to perform.
Thank you, everybody. I'd first like to just start by pleading for your mercy as I have severe jet lag, but I will persevere, and thank you all for persevering with us. I'd like to start by thanking the Sufi Studies Symposium, the organizers, the committees, the sponsors, the translators, everyone who helped in some capacity. We're very grateful, and it's been excellent so far, so thank you for that. I'm honored. It's a privilege to be here. I'm very pleased to be able to participate. By way of a short introduction, I'd like to say that this paper is a part of a larger project in which I'm trying to pay attention to two philosophical, or maybe we could say conceptual languages, used by Nurettin Topçu to discuss mystical experience. And so one of those languages is the language of Tasawwuf, or Sufism, and another language is the language of mysticism, right? And I want to pay attention to the difference in those terms and how they appear in his thought. But so I'll begin my paper now. Thank you. In a short essay titled Tasawwuf in Islam, published in the journal Harakat in 1970, the conservative modernist intellectual Nurettin Topçu posed a question: is Tasawwuf a religious path, or is it a philosophy? In this essay, Topçu places the question of Tasawwuf, in other words, what is Tasawwuf, in comparative terms, that is, what is its relationship to other traditions of thought? He follows his final question with an easy-to-miss, yet significant statement. He says, similarly to what we come across in Christian mysticism, we also find these kinds of mystic practices in other earlier religions. From the beginning, Topçu has entered into a process of comparison that is also one of translation. That is, comparison of concepts and practices across traditions. So for example, he mentions yoga in Hinduism, nirvana in Buddhism, mysticism in Christianity, and tasawwuf in Islam. That is also a form of translation. What is called mysticism in Christianity is called tasawwuf in Islam, or Islamic mysticism is tasawwuf, called Sufism in English or French or other languages. Topçu goes on to say, and I quote, essentially, tasawwuf, or Islamic mysticism, is indistinguishable from these earlier forms of mysticism. In all of them, the mystical foundations is religious experimentation. Since the essence of religion is an interior way of living, it must be accepted that mysticism is the ground of religion. Yet, at the same time, we see that mystical life is connected to a theory. End quote. Topçu's definition of religion and mysticism are general, rather than specific terms. Each religion possesses mystical, experiential content, although the form of that content, that is, its arrangement in practices, rituals, texts, and discourses, differs in those traditions. Topçu's approach reflects a larger post-Protestant, modernist practice of definition of religion that has been frequently addressed in the field of religious studies over the past 30 or 40 years. While the globalization of certain certain experiences and definitions of religion is an important issue, I will not take it up specifically here. Rather, I would like to focus on another element of the above statement, which reflects a rather different set of concerns with the content and form of tasawwuf as Islamic mysticism. At the beginning of the above quoted passage, Topçu refers to mysticism as a set of inner experiences and behaviors that are shared across religious traditions, but form the ground or basis of religion generally. Those familiar with the work of Émile Durkheim, one of the founders of the discipline of sociology in France, will find this approach familiar. Religion, as Durkheim famously stated, is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. That is to say, things set apart and forbidden, beliefs and practices which unite into one single moral community called a church, all those who adhere to them. While Durkheim was concerned with religion's role in the construction of the social as something sui generis, or unique, and distinct from the organic processes of nature, he showed little concern with religion or mysticism as a series of successive states that forms the ground of all religion despite its culturally distinct forms. Unlike William James, Durkheim was not concerned with the varieties of religious experience, qua experience. Religion for Durkheim was universal insofar as it was a shared condition of sociality, dividing the sacred and the profane and establishing conditions of communal moral obligation. Topçu's scholarship on tasawwuf as a kind of mysticism echoes Durkheim, but also extends beyond it. Topçu was in fact intimately familiar with Durkheim's work because he completed his doctorate at the Sorbonne under Maurice Blondel in the 1930s, and because of the prominence of Durkheimian sociology in Turkey vis-a-vis the work of Ziya Gökalp. However, Topçu's writing on religion goes beyond the Durkheimian approach, which formulated the concept of religion as shared human social experience that develops by way of evolution as social groups partake in the civilization process over time. Topçu claims that religion is not only a mechanism of social formation, but in its mystical core is a type of metaphysics, or type of philosophy. He says elsewhere that the question of religion is a philosophical topic, and he laments the ways in which it has been viewed as primarily a social concern or a social issue. Topçu transforms sociological definitions of religion into a philosophical definition. But in order to understand the language Topçu draws on to do this, we must bracket Durkheimian sociology and further examine two other sources of inspiration for Topçu, that is Anatolian Sufism on the one hand and the work of Henri Bergson on the other. A significant influence in Topçu's intellectual and spiritual formation was his relationship to Abdullah Bekine, a sheikh of the Naqshbandi Tariqa. Bekine took in a group of students as adepts, thus quickly effectively breaking the law which had banned association of the Sufi Tariqas in 1925, shortly after the founding of the Republic. Topçu saw in Bekine a solution to the material and metaphysical crisis of Republican Turkey. A man of action, Bekine encouraged political and social involvement. Topçu would eventually distance himself from this group of followers after Bekine's death due to Topçu's rejection of the nomination of Mehmet Zahid Kotku as Bekine's successor. Topçu saw the selection of Kotku as a betrayal of Bekine and considered it the result of political influence. This soured Topçu on the political aspirations of Turkey's mid-century Islamist movements. Topçu remained influential as a teacher, but not as an ideologue. In addition to Bekine, Topçu had a relationship with three other global intellectual figures who would leave an indelible mark on his intellectual formation. First was Louis Massignon, the French Orientalist known for his work on Mansur al-Hallaj. Second was Maurice Blondel, a Catholic philosopher known for his 1893 work Action, Essays on a Critique of Life and a Science of Practice. And lastly, Henri Bergson, probably the world's most famous philosopher at the turn of the century. In French philosophical circles, Bergsonism came to signify a mystifying spiritualist tendency, which was eventually cited as a reason for his dismissal in Europe after the massive destruction wrought by the Second World War. Flinching in the face of Sartre's existentialism, Bergson would only be revived after the 1966 publication of Gilles Deleuze's Bergsonism, which recuperated many of Bergson's concepts, notably intuition as a practice of epistemological method suitable for ascertaining the flux and flow of duration, that is the passage of time, and contraction of habits through repetition and through memory. Yet in Turkey, like in Egypt and West Africa, the spiritualist reading of Bergson would remain powerfully persuasive. Topçu's engagement with Bergson's key philosophical interventions was an important element in articulating the continued relevancy of the concept of intuition in Muslim intellectual circles. Topçu took up the question of intuition and its relationship to religion in the third and final section of his thesis, which he wrote on Bergson, and the title of this section is called Sezgi ve Din. Topçu hones in on the notion of intuition and extends Bergson's theoretical distinction between two kinds of religion, the static and the dynamic. Topçu's adoption of this binary pushes Bergson's largely Catholic reading to the study of Islam. Topçu writes, and I quote, "Bergson divides religion into two types, static and dynamic. Static religion is the closed religion of the city and the market and society. As for dynamic religion, it is the religion of humanity. It is open religion. Christianity and Islam are dynamic religions. True mysticism shows itself in dynamic religions." End quote. Topçu continues with a further explanation, and I quote, "The aim of mysticism is to create cosmic unity and love. Yet the human will, united with God through mystical contact, has the capacity to produce and spread universal love among humanity. But it is impossible to arrive at this universal love between all humans by means of expansion or simply by opening one's heart. Yet the mystic who identifies with the élan vital, or the vital impulse, embraces all of humanity within a single undivided love. Because of the mystic, humanity becomes deified through gradually spreading love's light, which desires to be totally consumed by God." End quote. Two themes emerge here that indicate a double reading of mystical practice on the part of Topçu. On the one hand, he reads mysticism through Bergson's distinction between the closed and the open, and on the other, through Sufism as a path to unification of the individual with God. Topçu follows Bergson in claiming that open religion is the religion of the mystic par excellence, and cannot be achieved by means of expanding tolerance through liberal notions of progress or standards of living through state-centered national development, a position he attributes to the sociologist Ziya Gökalp. Gökalp's Durkheimian approach had little to say about Sufism or mysticism, but claimed religion was the primary form of social solidarity that could be elevated inasmuch as it could be nationalized. Gökalp argued that Islam was a necessary component of social life insofar as to be Turkish in 20th century Turkey, as some nationalists might have claimed, was to be a Sunni Muslim, a position that was also shared by certain other conservative Republicans, for whom Islam was one element of Turkish culture, a significant one among many. Topçu, drawing from Bergson, would call this a sociology of static religion, which leaves religion's dynamism totally untheorized and unpracticed. The opening of the dynamic can only take place through those who have achieved intuitive knowledge of either universal love, as in Bergson's case, or of God, for Topçu. Mysticism, for both Bergson and Topçu, is exemplary in its ability to encounter the whole of life and its flux and becoming through intuitive processes rather than through rational calculation. Static religion cannot reach universal status because it is locked into the particularity of its cultural and historical forms. The best it can produce is a sociology of religion. Mystical love, in contrast, can extend to all humankind and thus open the individual up to transformative action. Like religion's static and dynamic forces, morality can be mapped according to these two impulses. Again, static morality is societal. Open or dynamic morality is expressed in the individual's ability to extend beyond the confines of social and cultural particulars in order to achieve the truly universal, that is, the truly universal human moral conscience. Topçu goes on to say, and I quote again, "Let us now turn to open morality. This is the morality of humanity. We find examples of this morality in the sage, or hakim, of antiquity, and in the saints revealed by religion. What road must one travel in order for an individual to be capable of becoming a sage or saint? According to some, one must have knowledge before anything else, and for others, one must grasp love." Bergson analyzed the problem from the perspective of the individual inner self or conscience. Heroes and saints are found even now in our midst. What we must do is examine them and adopt their good conduct. Topçu's explication of Bergson invokes an image of the mystic that is not simply one who breaks the confines of static morality and religion, but one who must be sought after and whose habits and actions must be inculcated through observation and adoption. Bergson's mystic, therefore, becomes Topçu's peer or sheikh. In Hilmi Ziya Ülken's survey of the philosophical currents in late Ottoman Republican periods, titled The History of Modern Thought in Turkey, he confirms Bergson's lingering effects on Republican intellectuals. Ülken shows that Topçu's translation of Bergson's concepts into the grammar of Sufism was far from idiosyncratic. He says, and I quote, "İsmail Hakkı Baltacıoğlu's The Dervish Going to Karbala, Mustafa Şekip Tunç's True Freedom, Yakup Kadri Kara Osmanoğlu's From the Garden of Saints, all express this modern mystical mood or style generated by a metaphysical trend coming from the West. The new trend, therefore, has fused the spirit of the people and popular Sufism with Western philosophy. In the first instance, it was Riza Tawfik who sought out a relation between Bergsonism and popular Sufism. Bergsonism and popular Sufism, for example, in Yunus Emre. He attempted to interpret Turkish mystics' understanding of the world with this new philosophical language," end quote. The unification of Anatolian Sufi masters with currents in European philosophy, as noted by Ülken, was a strong source of critique and a prevalent form of political and intellectual opposition in late Ottoman reformist proclivity for scientism, most notably in the form of positivism, or Kemalist reliance on the emergent discipline of sociology through Durkheim and Gökalp. As Nazim Iram, a scholar of Turkish conservatism, notes, "Thus what made scientism the orthodoxy of the day was the politicization of positivism as the grammar of cultural change that set down the principles of the good life and of a just and legitimate government. The Bergsonian opposition to positivist sociology and mechanistic materialism provided an alternative vocabulary for Islamic modernist currents. Nurettin Topçu, writing well after the marginalization of the Ottoman ulama, found in Bergson's intuition a conceptual vocabulary for addressing the immediate data of consciousness, that is, an intuition of the fluxes and flows of reality prior to its stabilization or stagnation in the intellect. Intuition then became a method for apprehending immediate knowledge that only a select few are able to acquire in its fullest, either renowned Sufis like Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, Ibn Arabi, and Yunus Emre, or prophets whose faculties of intuition and imagination are unrivaled as exemplified by the figures of Jesus and Muhammad. Sufis, like prophets, do not simply intuit, but are led by their immediate knowledge or to action or movement. Action, not just intuition, then was the defining feature of both the Friends of God and potentially intellectuals in the modern nation state. By integrating a philosophy of intuition and action into the historical grammar of metaphysics of Sufism, Topçu was able to mark out a middle conservative position between the total rejection or marginalization of religion by some intellectual elites and reformist positions of certain Islamists who were either ambivalent about Sufism's theoretical qualities or valued it solely for its potential political networks and connections. Thank you.
Thank you, Micah. So we have about 15 minutes for questions.
My question is for Micah. It seems that there's a lot of interesting parallels between what Topçu was doing and what Allama Iqbal was doing in India. And Allama Iqbal, I think, his writings would have preceded those of Topçu. But there was a strong emphasis that Allama Iqbal placed on mystical epistemology. He himself wrote his PhD thesis on Rumi in Germany.
Right.
And he also emphasized the dynamic aspect of religion as opposed to the static aspect, which he equated with the ulama and with tradition.
Right.
So are these parallel developments that are taking place in India and Turkey, or was Topçu himself indebted in some way to Iqbal? Because Iqbal's saying a lot of the same things a little bit earlier than Topçu would have been saying.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think this is an important area is to think about these overlaps. I think the common factor is that both were very enthusiastic about the writings of Bergson. And I think this is a part of the question of what transnational critical discourses do in particular contexts. So I think instead of saying that Topçu was reading Iqbal, I'm not sure if there's any evidence. I know that Iqbal was discussed, right, in the Republican period, but whether Topçu himself is drawing on Iqbal is, I think, difficult to say, but they definitely both rely on this kind of transnational spiritualist language to not reject reason, but to think about a critique of reason to allow for experience. And so mysticism, or tasawwuf, provides a language for that, I think, both in Iqbal and in Topçu, and against what they see as the kind of stagnant forms that they equate with ulama positions. So I think it provided a critical, discursive position to allow them to face what they saw as stagnation in both contexts. So the projects are very similar. There's some key differences, but they're very similar projects. Yeah, thank you.
If there are no further questions, sorusu olan varsa alalım, yoksa. Buyurun.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talks. I had a question about the Ilkhanate period in the Sufi shrines. I found it very interesting about the kind of complexities of these Sufi shrines and their relationship to what it seems to be like a kind of popular love of Ali as demonstrated on the shrines. I was wondering about the patronage networks that funded what you said was the kind of renaissance in Ilkhanid architecture around the Sufi shrines. What do we know about who was funding these shrines and what was their motivation? As far as I know, like in the Ilkhanid period, there's a kind of flirtation with Shiism, and then there's a Sunni kind of reformism that comes through. I just wanted to know more about the patronage networks and how they were doing. Thank you.
You talk about the patron of this shrine. The patrons are in various categories of Ilkhanid social, such as wazirs and official courtier, and they are devotees, and 4 categories of people present, and this architectural building. Let me. The Sufi sheikh who appeared in the time at the tomb around which the building are clustered. The person who sponsored the work, the local overseers who supervised the work, and the craftsman who did the work. These 4 types of cross-section of Ilkhanid society, and show the personal bond and economic ties affected architectural enterprise. They illustrate many of the main trends in Ilkhanid society, such as the acceptance and legitimation of Sufi order, the increasing reverence toward Ali felt by Sunnis, and that transfer of people and resources throughout the empire. Enough?
I have a question. I have a question concerning the present situation of these shrines in Iran. Do they have visitors, or are there restoration projects funded by the state, perhaps? I don't know. What is the situation nowadays in Iran with Sufi, concerning Sufi shrines? Thank you.
These shrines are all open for a visitor, and many of Iranian people and other people of the world any years coming to Iran and visiting this building. All of building is open for visitor.
Ben de Banu'ya bir soru sormak istiyorum. Kendi tecrübesini takip etmiş bir yakını olarak kendisiyle ortak bulduğu bu büyük şeyhi anlatır.
She has followed. In both your experience and in Kemâlî's experience, what was the most closest common point, and how did this attract and affect your life? I think our common point is, finding a murshid. And Kemâlî was also initiated by a Kamil Murshid, and I'm hoping that I'm also initiated by a Kamil Murshid, by a perfect spiritual guide. Dear Banu, can I ask you a question? This is actually a very comprehensive, literal. Basiret's conception. Do you have any other, words related to that concept? I think all the gnostics are the people of discernment. I haven't actually personally researched, but I think Niyazi also has, such references. But since Kemâlî is also a blind person, he focused on the concept of seeing, of the concept of foresight, and that's probably why he focused. Let's have a break for 10 minutes.
Photo taken. So if you could please go up that way.
Efendim hepinizi saygıyla, sevgiyle selamlıyorum. Birinci Uluslararası Tasavvuf Araştırmaları Lisansüstü Öğrencileri Sempozyumu'nun ikinci oturumuna başlamış bulunuyorum. 4 konuşmacımız var. Şimdi benimle birlikte 4 hanım bir beyefendi oluyor.
I have 4 panelists here, 3 female and 1 male. I said let's do some positive discrimination. Kenan was actually the 4th one, but now we want to give the floor to him first. So he is going to be focusing on the Muslim effects of Dante's Divine Comedy. Hello. Is there anyone who's Italian or who is of Italian origin? Because he or she may want to leave now because we will be burying Dante in a minute, a little bit. I would like to start by giving the reasons why I chose this one. We are generally told that we take things from the East, from the West, but now let's see what the West has taken from us. Dante's Divine Comedy is not authentic and has actually taken the sources that are taken the earlier Islam texts as his sources. So since Palacios' book has been taken as a basis for such discussions. In the Middle East, in Europe, scholastic period was very challenging and difficult. At the beginning of the 11th and the 12th century, especially science and philosophy suffered from the inefficiency of the scholastic teachings, and there became a trend now, and the bridge was made by the Muslim writers who actually translated some Arabic texts to Latin language. And the 12th period, 12th century has been called as the pre-Renaissance period. And so such studies have actually established a base for the Renaissance and the reforms on the 12th and the 13th century. Italians' biggest poet, Dante, who passed away in 1321, is actually an ethical philosopher, a political thinker. So as we all know, his opus is the Divine Comedy, and his work has been translated in so many languages following Bible translations. Palacios has written a book on Islam and Dante. So his book actually compares the Islamic texts with Dante's writings. So he's very well known for his comparative studies. He's a Spanish writer and born in Spain, was trained in Saragossa University, and has also received priesthood from Jesuit University. He studied on Ghazali, and in Madrid University he actually had his PhD on aestheticism and Ghazali's teachings. So he actually published many articles on the Islamic text's effect on Dante's writings. And his comparative studies showed very bravely the effects of Islamic texts. Especially this one, Islam and Dante book, has received a lot of oppositions and criticisms, but Palacios has refuted these arguments and has published his book twice. Dante in Islam, this book, says that Dante actually gets the inspiration from the Prophet's walk at night, Isra, as we call. So he actually focuses on two things. The hell, purgatory, and paradise sections can be actually compared with the ascension. And a divine comedy, the effect of Christian literature on divine comedy. So Dante actually was influenced by these following sources. He focused on the Islamic literature, the translation done through this period, especially the original coming from the 11th century El-Kushairi's Kitab el-Miraj, which is related to ascension. Abraham al-Pekum has translated this, L'Askala Muhammadi, the ascension of the Prophet. And he actually worked with Brunetto Latolo, who is actually a very close teacher of Dante. So it's not a very far possibility for Dante to be able to reach this translation. Another source he has been inspired is Risale-ül Gufra, which is composed of two sections. The first one is about journey on in heaven and hell, and the imaginary creatures that have been confronted, and they have actually been supported by hadith and the verses of the Quran. Just like in Dante's Divine Comedy, in this book, one can actually see very poetic language, as in Dante. So he may actually have been influenced by this poetic language regarding the accession of the Prophet. And thirdly, Muhyiddin Arabi could be considered as someone who Dante got the inspiration. And especially the part about hell is influenced by Ibn Arabi's Kitab el-Isra, Night Journey, and Fütuhat-ı Mekkiye. So in both works in Arabi's texts, there is a similarity between there is a great similarity between the symbols and the approaches. The Persian culture could also be another factor that he has been influenced. Arda Viraf's book on Arda Virafname could also be another source. And the spirit after death could reach the hell or heaven depending on the good contact in this world. So although Divine Comedy may not be very directly, related to this, Hakim Senai, who passed away in 1730, Seyrul Ibad, one of his works, could actually be a bridge to his work. So in his work,
the spirit goes through different stages of life and goes back to its main source. And after Palacios, European Ironologists looked into the Divine Comedy and Seyrul el-Miyat and have found out many similarities that cannot be underestimated. Ahmed al-Qurtubi and Ayyub are the others who were inspired by Dante's works. So I don't know how much time I have left, but let's have a look at the comparisons in between Islamic literature. There have been certain studies by Gabriel Joseph Etat. In Paris in 1901, his work was published, but due to lack of better evidence, this study wasn't very much interesting for many. And the main theme of the work is the ascension and Isra in Islam. Secondly, concepts of crime, place, and punishment are referred with the understanding of afterworld. And in the basis of the work lies the Islamic thought and the Islamic civilization, which had an impact in South Spain, of course, influenced followers of Dante and the political thinkers of the time. And he defines hell as a realm that is shrinking step by step, and coliseums are accepted as the places, venues for torture, and there's a similarity in between the two. The purgatorium is the place where people purify themselves of their sins, but in Arabic the word is araf, and it is much more overlapping with a high mountain, and towards araf one whirls around to the right and enters into the clean areas with their right steps, while it is the left one when it is the other way around. And totally Islam, astronomy, and Kalam traditions are very much overlapping with his works. Following Palacios, Vergilius, and Ibn Arabi were compared, and there's an analogy in between Hızır and Tarjuman al-Ashwaq in his work. He talks about divine love and the symbolic women character Gizam, and the inspiration of Dante's own journey is Beatrice, the female character. So both are symbolically expressing the divine love through those female characters. Nizavi Gencevi, who died in 1222, Heft Peker and Sharafname are his works, and he talks about the similarities, the descriptions, and the descriptions, certain definitions are also similar to the ones in Dante's poems, and many common points, destiny, and in the Catholic literature, they do not appeal to many, yet on the other hand, in the East, it draws a lot of attention in terms of literature, in terms of mysticism. His works are deemed very valuable. So we can say that Middle Ages Christianism and Islam are very different from one another. While Christianity was under mysticism, while Islam has reached up to a very unique, unprecedented pinnacle. And looking into the Muslim resources, Europe left out of the scholastic period and paved its way towards a Renaissance. Dante Alighieri is one important figure in that field, and with his work, Divine Comedy, radical developments unfolded, and a Spanish priest also proved various aspects of the study, and this was a short summary of different studies. In history, we know that certain parties, certain countries and civilizations are influenced by the others, and the works or studies of some are influenced by the others. And Dante's work, of course, was naturally influenced by some other scholars of Islamic studies, but of course it needed to take at least 600 years for the truth to be fully revealed. We would like to thank Kerim Güç for being timely, effective, and for that insightful presentation. In Dante's Divine Comedy, the miniatures of those descriptions can be seen in Miraçname, written in the 15th century. It's a work with miniatures on it. I believe it's not in Topkapı Palace, but somewhere else, probably abroad. And the descriptions are totally the same, and they were taken from Muslim resources, the inspiration of it indeed. And Kerim talked about it. Kerim is a master's degree student at Üsküdar University, and now we have another student, Hülya Taştekin, and she will be talking about divine love in Annihilation Station in Niyazi Misri Divan. Hello everyone, and welcome. I would like to extend respect to each and every one of you. Presentation is titled Divine Love in Annihilation Station in Niyazi Misri Divan.
Niyazi Misri çok özür diliyorum. Evet.
As you can see from his birthday, he was born in 8th of February in 1618, so we're celebrating the 400th birthday of the Hazret. Niyazi Misri is one of the prominent Sufis of 17th century Turkish literature. His life was full of travels and exiles, and he has written many pieces of works in Turkish and Arabic, and his style is very enthusiastic and very excited, and he accepts the idea of Vahdet-i Vücud and reflects the ideas of Yunus Emre, Ibn Arabi, and Fuzuli. He has translated the terminology of tasawwuf and made it more easy to understand. His poems have been favored in all of the Sufi circles, and Divan-i İlahiyat has become almost a manual for all sorts of dervishes. And in his
ve örnekleriyle anlatmıştır.
On eternal love and wishes to reach the state of marifa, and he tells us what to do and not to do to reach salvation. And all of the information in his divan are based on his experience. As you know, to obtain the knowledge of truth, it's only possible following the Seyr-i Suluk in Sufism. Seyr-i Suluk is the ways and manners to reach to God, and the obtaining of truth knowledge is the last final goal of Seyr-i Sülûk, and it means being united, being one with Hak. And this is the İnsan-ı Kamil, and it is actually mentioned as well with the term fena. Fena means non-existence, disappearance. That means all the worldly affairs and things are liberated from the follower, and all of the states can be experienced as follows. Fena fi şeyh is finding the fena in the sheikh. In that phase, the murid is in love with the murshid and takes away the ideas from anything else and is immersed in the love of the sheikh, and this is the first of the states of suluk. Fena fi Rasul is the second, and this is being melted in the love of the Prophet and to obtain and adopt the adjectives and the morals of the Prophet. The third one is Fena fillah, which is getting rid of all the humanly adjectives and aspects and being adjectives and being funny with God. The love in the states of Fena in Seyr-i Sülûk. Love in Sufism is not only the start of creation, but it's also the most to take one to Kemâlî. There are various stages of training in Seyr-i Sülûk, and it is actually a journey of love. The salih
aşkında fena bularak yol alır.
in
Fena sayesinde ben
in the love of the Prophet, in Fena fi Resul makam, and in the Fena fi last state. And after those, he gets rid of his own conscience and disappears of all the adjectives and gets covered by the adjectives of God. After that, Beka is born, and what matters is to make this Beka state permanent and to reach the secret of Tawhid and to see the unity in oneness and to see the oneness in unity. To see the multiplicity and to see the multiplicity unity. Explanations to realize all of these states, to reach all of these makams is only possible by giving a rational mind and to get rid of the self-consciousness. This cannot be done with the daily rational life. Things that are possible can be seen as craziness or lunacy. So you have to get rid of your true self to find the real life. Now we will talk about the path of love in the Fena states in Niyazi Misri Divan. Niyazi Misri states Marifet as the knowledge of truth, and he says that fasting and prayer and Hajj and such activities will not be enough, and the first thing, the most important thing, is he talks to the heart. He says, come you heart and get rid of everything other than God and follow the path of love, he says, because there is no way for God to enter your heart unless you get rid of the others in your heart. The separation's fire tortures the heart and the tears come out of your eyes as boiling water, and he says that if this fire that is burning him could be visible, the whole of the universe would be burning from one end to the other. So anybody who gets this pain gets an almost supernatural power allowing him to run to the truth. this ghazal of Niyazi Misri depicts his feelings once he finds his sheikh. The wine of love is the eternal wine of love, and this Shem-i Tawheed is the shining light, the Nur of Tawheed. And once he sees that Nur, he becomes unstable and he is revolving, turning like a fly around the fire, and he is attracted to the heart of his sheikh, and then he sees the circle of zikr and he wants to whirl, and he is like a Majnun, crazy with the love of Layla, and he says he's become a lunatic, a diwane. In this ghazal, the poet tells us about the despair and grief that the separation from his beloved causes him. And he impersonates himself with Majnun and says nobody can give him the remedy to his despair. In Fena fir Rasul, the state of love, Niyazi Misri always talked about the love of the Prophet, his highness, and that he was the reason for all of this universe to be created. And he has referred to the Kanzi Mahfi, Hadisi Qudsi. And we can see lots of Naat Sharif that takes place in his divan that are appraisals to the Prophet. But at the Fenafir Rasul state, he clearly explains his love for the Prophet in his ghazal numbered 110. He says that the Prophet is the most beloved messenger and is the mediator between his servants, and that he is a patient of love, and he is yearning for the end of separation and union with God. And he says at the end of his Naat, come and take the existence of Niyazi from the plane of the earth. So he wants to express his love for Fena fil Rasul state. Also in Fena fillah state, the love continues. This state is where the Arifs are out of their own consciousness, and what they say is recorded by the people who are in their company. But some of them are with such ecstasy that they can be seen as küfür by the normal people around them. And just like Hallaj Mansur's word, an al-haq, causing his head, and Beka arises from Fena, Arif gets back to the consciousness, and the states acquired at the Fena fillah level are permanent. Then that person sees the haq in public and experiences wahdat, unity, in multiplicity, in kesret. So he's united with the beloved, and he disappeared in the beloved. And at that level, with the states that he has acquired, he's now gone back to the earthly life, but his states acquired are permanent with them. Misri says the end of the maqams is to give up on everything. the seen zahir and the unseen batin are all gone, and this is when all is left behind, and there is nothing but God. The joy of the lovers who love God is unity, tawhid, and their joy is tawhid, and they put all the world behind them, and their only remedy is tawhid, he says. The shathiye of the lovers, the ashiks, are mostly written in a fena fillah state, and in Divan of Misri we see many examples of this ecstasy and unconsciousness, because Misri says, God Almighty, repentance from me that I shall never drink wine, because once you drink the wine and you have your lover, you lose all control, he says. And that wine mentioned here is of course the eternal love. And he says the multiplicity is gone and the unity has come, and I have been united with Dost, with God, and all public became haq, and there is no one other. So based on the Sufi thoughts, the human being has left his motherland and has been sent to this earth. And if that person chooses to follow the path, then one can reach back to his initial state. And these are the states of Seyr Suluk. And all of these maqams are manifestations of states of the human being. Passing through those states, you reach your truth and your essence. And this is where the transformation takes place. And in this article, we talked about the cycle of love. We saw that there was love first, and when everything ends, love will stay. And what rules, governs, and rotates this world is only love. And it starts with the eternal love, and then based on the levels of creation, the prophet comes, and then in this world, love becomes manifest with the analogies and similes. And Niyazi Misri's Divan is a stellar example of a literary work that explains it in the best possible form. Thank you so much.
Biz de teşekkür ediyoruz. Hülya Hanım'ın tebliği gerçekten çok ilginçti. Şimdiye
Ms. Tashtekin's presentation was very interesting, both from Sufism and classical Turkish literature. The concept of love was addressed to about what it is, and many presentations were made, but for the first time a study addresses the levels of annihilation, so we can see the ascension of love. Fana fi Shay, Fana fil Rasul, and Fana fillah are the stages or the levels to ascend upwards, and we would like to congratulate her because she filtered them very well. And Niyazi Misri's Divan is the best example for that. Thank you. A while ago, Kerim talked about eschatology, referring to Dante's Divine Comedy. And now Kotoko Madonna, a student coming from far away, will be talking about a similar subject. Kotoko, in the project of Bridge of Both Sides took part, and last year she visited Istanbul twice. The first one during the summer period and the second one during the winter, and had the chance we had a chance to read certain Turkish texts translated from Ottoman Turkish. She speaks very good Turkish, but she will be making her presentation in English, and her presentation will be titled Niyazi Mishri's Views on the Perfected Man in His Eschatology.
Merhabalar. Öncelikle sevgili Cemal hocamız ve sevgili Emine hocamıza çok teşekkür ediyorum. Ve bizi davet eden ve destek veren tüm hocalarımıza ve de arkadaşlarımıza çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Professors and all of our
to share such an important opportunity with all of you. Yes, today I would like to talk about Niyazi Mishri's views on the perfected man and his eschatology. As mentioned by Fulya Hanım, Niyazi Mishri is great Sufi Shaykh of the 17th century Ottoman Empire. Mishri is a great Sufi poet. His Divan, collection of poetries in particular, is considered a masterpiece of Ottoman Tasawwuf literature. In addition, he is fluently ranked as one of the school of Ibn Arabi by several previous studies. We can find Mishri as a thinker in his some project works, including this is important works Mawa'id al-Irfan and Risale Wahdatul Wujud. Mishri built his own worldview based on the theory of the oneness of being, Wahdatul Wujud, which originated from Ibn Arabi and explained as the concept of the perfected man, al-Insan al-Kamil. In the light of the social environment and of that time and the principle as a Sufi master. Most previous studies on Mishri have been conducted in Turkey and have focused on his poems based on literary methods. Moreover, the concern with study on Ottoman Sufis has been growing, and it has been proposed that many Sufis and scholars in Ottoman society were under the ideological influence of Ibn Arabi's theories. However, very few attempts have been made at analyzing their thought in the context of the history of Islamic thought. In my study, I aim to review Mishri's thought from a philosophical perspective by referring to his various works. I expect my studies on Mishri's original doctrines will provide useful contributions of studies on thought of Ibn Arabi and his followers. As a first step in my analysis, this study will clarify Mishri's views on the perfected man, focusing on his role as a unifier, and his paper discussed the role related to Mishri's mystical eschatology. So, in the 17th centuries, Sufis were affected by the anti-Sufi oriented group known as Qadzadelir. They punished many Sufi shaykhs and exiled them because of the esoteric thought of opposing voices. Mishri was exiled by that Qadzadelir, and in one of his poems, Mishri presented his harsh perspective on Qadzadelir, who Mishri called a preacher's vice, and for Mishri, Ikijihan, the society at that time was found to have been intimidated. so Ikijihan. And he compares Qadza daily preachers to the people of Sharia, every Sharia, and Tariqa members to the people of the trust, every Haq or every Hakika. According to Musri, in such a divided society, the concept of the perfected man refers to a man who stands between two groups, and it's expected to play mediation role between them like a Thai actor, or the confluence of two seas, much more Al-Bahraini, standing on the confluence of two knowledges, Sharia and Hakika. It is expressed in the Quranic verse. Therefore, it is necessary for the perfected man to acquire in-depth knowledge on Sharia and Hakika, and to unify the two knowledge. Musri emphasizes the figure of the perfected man as a unified jami. In particular, the man is required to unify two things that seem contrary. In other part of his book, the perfected man had been used synonymously with the perfected guide, Mursid Kamil, by Musri. He described a spiritual guide, Mursid, as a man who is perfected himself and makes others perfect. Bi tarbiyatul Mursid, Kamil. Thus, the perfected man is considered to fill the practical role of raising his disciples, murid, to his own level. The gap between mursid and murid should be removed by guidance irshad of the perfected mursid, namely the perfected man. We can find that there is a unification between mursid and murid. Such views on the ideal mursid, which is practical role of the perfected man, form the basis of the tariqa activities for the accomplishment of the mystical path, Seir Suluk. So as I previously stated, unification is a principal term which is attributed to the perfected man. Rethinking the meaning of the term, we can presume that Musri had been viewing the world as only the self-revelation tajalli by the one, with following the theory of oneness of beings. According to Musri, every dichotomy has to be unified above the reality of Muhammad, Hakikat Muhammadi, which implies a level of the first revelation of the one. Unification of dichotomy as the eye of the perfect man is found between even two temporal spatial motif in the Islamic eschatology, like this world, dunya, and hereafter, akhirah, and paradise, and hell, Jahannam. Basically, the belief in the hereafter is one creed. According to Quran, it is clear that all human beings will be revived on the day of Akhirat, or Yawmul al-Qiyamah, after they experience depths on God's declaration code. They will be summoned in front of God to be judged depending on their good and bad deeds. There are beautiful descriptions of paradise in which people who observe the divine commands will be allowed, as opposed to hell, in which men will suffer for divine requital, like that. Okay. For Musli's interpretations of eschatology, I focus on his prose work, Risale Wahdatul Wujud, Treatise of the Unity of Existence in English. This work was written in Ottoman Turkish, and it's an important piece of work in which Musli describes his mystical ideas based on quotations from Quran verses and some hadiths and Sufi poems. As mentioned, according to Musli, the perfected man unifies two contraries, namely he sees and knows every contrary as one, and therefore it is said by Musli that the origin, asl, of every two pole is one truth. He defined time division between this world and hereafter as follows. This world and hereafter are forbidden haram for the school of Allah. Seeing and preferring them are also forbidden, because what people call this world and hereafter must be the divine attribution. Visualizing other than God is surely suspicious and forbidden. According to Muslim, there is never to word ikijihan, which is evinced by the following quotation in the present word. Whoever is blind in this life will be blind in the hereafter. It's from Quran 1772 ayat. Time division between this world and hereafter is stated to exist is external zahir meaning, and there are no divisions or difference between them beyond the level of divine attributions. Muslim's time theory is supposedly a combination of mystical concepts of time. As one of them, Muslims mentioned a child of time, Ibn al-Waqt or Ibn Waqt, while quoting a passage from Jalaluddin Rumi. The passage of his poetry is follows: "Oh dear friend, Sufi is a child of time. To say this is tomorrow's never comes from a principle tariqah." This concept indicated a Sufi who perfected his mystical path and transcend a temporary restriction is unbound by the existence of time. There is no past and future, but only this moment for God. It's likely that Muslim allows the use of this concept, Ibn al-Waqt, a child of time, in his treatise based on that ontological time theory. In addition, the concept is derived from a moral lesson of Sufism. Therefore, Muslim quoted that a man who dedicated himself to tariqah must not die to the next day, and insisted by Rumi. There is only this moment for the perfected man, as Ibn al-Waqt, who transcended temporal destruction. If a man wants to be perfected, it is forbidden to believe or prefer the existence of the past and future, and therefore this world and hereafter. Though the eyes of the perfected man, this world and hereafter are unified in the inner batin dimensions, and there is only this moment for performing good deeds. In addition, according to Muslim, there is no paradise and hell, but only the two exist in external meaning. He said that what you call a heavenly city, orchard, and garden are all in this world, not in paradise. This explanation possibly means that those material gifts are not truly in divine required given in the hereafter. Although there is apparently spatial division between the paradise and hell in the Quran verse, Muslims explain true meanings of those two concepts, paradise and hell, as follows. First, to be unbound by the belief of paradise and hell is surely the paradise, and to be attached to the belief is surely hell. Second is, what is called the paradise is good morality, huluk, and what is called the hell is bad morality, sui huluk. Your being heavenly is your being with the truth, but to be hellish is to see existence as other than him. It is clear there is no spatial division between paradise and hell in Muslims' explanation. Rather, the only difference is whether to reach the one or not. Thus, to be with the truth is equal to paradise, and to be ignorant, jahil, is equal to hell. Therefore, the perfected man never sees other than the truth, but only sees him in everything as a space of self-revelation of him. Hence, the perfected man is sure in paradise, as interpreted by Muslims. As mentioned previously, there is no two sides. However, Musli instructed his disciple to let go of belief paradise or hell, and to know what is to be perfected through using these motifs, which existed in only external meaning as two. Consequently, Musli's mystical ecstology, temporal and spatial division is perfectly nothing for the perfected man, and the two different motifs, for example, world hereafter and paradise and hell, are unified in the eyes of the perfected man. In my studies, I elucidate Musli's views on the perfected man and his mystical ecstology. According to Musli, the role of a perfected man as a universe is to be a mediator between two groups, Ifri Sharia and Ifri Hakika, and a spiritual guide to raise his disciples to his level. In addition, Musli insisted that every two poles disappear at the highest point of a man, which is the level of the perfected man, although the pole remains as two in the external world, like the conflict between Qadazadeh and the Sufis in the 17th century Ottoman society. Furthermore, for Quranic terms, Musli believed that all contrary concepts are originally one. In conclusion, my study attempted to reveal the following. First, Muslims expected the theory of a perfected man to have social practical roles as a unifier between two groups. And second, they are characteristically unified models of time and space in the context of Muslims' eschatology. In his eschatology, that point is the Quranic motif seen as two external are originally one. It seems that Musli explained the truth by distinguishing inner and external meaning of, and rationalized his mystical views by discussing ethical issues. Ibn al-Waqt as a moral lessons or husni fuluk in paradise. In such moral discussions, surely we wonder that what is the law of the perfected man? It's obviously his role is to guide others for developing their morality. He stands between the truth and men to lead them to him. I would like to evaluate Niazi Musli as a sophisticated thinker of the school of Ibn Arabi, focusing on his views on the perfected man, and will suggest his mystical eschatology as a significant point in the history of Islamic thought with further considering. Thank you for your attention.
Kotoko'ya çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Bir tebliğ içinde insanı kamil, manevi eskatoloji,
eschatology, the perfected man, the ties between the world and the hereafter were of the subjects she referred to. Our last speaker for this session is Gülcan Koç. I have always had the chance to come together with my students, maybe God's blessing, or maybe Professor Elhun pulled the strings for me. Gülcan is also a student of mine, and she will be talking about the interpretation and the analysis of the frozen dragon story in the Masnavi according to various commentaries.
Merhabalar. Konya Selçuk.
Hello, from Konya Selçuk University, the Institute of Mevlana Rumi and Mevlana Rumi Studies Institute. I will be talking about the interpretation and the analyses of the frozen dragon story in the Mesnevi according to various commentaries. The texts that you see on the slide are a section of the interpretations or the translations or the analysis of this story. According to Rumi, Mesnevi is the form of the form of the form.
Ulaşmaya ve halkı hak ile tanış.
The usul of the religion, he says, and his efforts are about to make the topics clear and understandable, and he has used a variant method, and he used stories for that purpose. And Mevlana tried to make the topics in Mesnevi as clear as he possibly can make. In Turkish literature, he used the Şer tradition, and this has a very particular place in Turkish literature, and it has been translated into Turkish multiple times, and it's partially or totally amended to be clearer to understand. And it starts with a couple of stories and translations, but it has become very common and large enough to create its own literature. And there had been various pieces of works. Many different people amended and wrote shares, but there are very limited number of sharih who only worked on Mesnevi. So you can see the names of them. Süleyman Nafihi, translation of Mazlum Mesnevi, and he's one of the closest to the original. Veled Çelebi İzbudak is the
Abdülbaki Gölpınarlı.
It's a prose amendment, and also Abdülbaki Gölpınarlı prose amendment, and he used the classical method of şer, and he has referred to some of the previous works, and he has included some recent information. Şefik Can has also written one. It is 3 volumes, and it differs from the other translations based on a revision based on topics, and all of the stories are told as a whole. And it has been written, as you know, the stories in Mesnevi were verbally told by Mevlana, and Veled Çelebi has put them in writing. So they were all separately written. Şefik Can combined them under their topics. Ahmet Avni Konuk was a very musical person, and he has written a şer for the whole of Mesnevi. Tahirül Mevlevi wrote a şer only for the first 4 volumes, and he started with about 1,000 baits from the 5th volume, and he first wrote the Persian bait and then the translation, and then he has had references from various resources. Muhlis Koner has written a translation which is like a summary of all the topics in all 6 volumes, and Hijabi Kırlangıç has translated Mesnevi in 6 volumes. Our goal in this study is giving the various explanations, differences, and similarities in different versions of translations of the frozen dragon story. So when we look at the frozen dragon story, we have read all the different versions of Mesnevi translations, and we have looked at the differences and similarities, and then we will have a specific explanation of the story. This story is told in the couplets, the baits of Mesnevi Sherif 976 and 1074. It talks about a snake hunter going to the mountains to catch a snake, and he finds a frozen dragon and thinks that the dragon is dead, and wraps the dragon up and brings it to Baghdad, and he wants to make money out of the interest of people in a dragon, and brings the snake to the side of the river Shad and leaves it there, and he thinks that when the people gather he will make more money, and after a certain time it becomes quite a crowd, and it becomes so crowded that nobody knows who is who, and people are so bedazzled they can't even see each other. This actually resembles the doomsday, and when the Iraqi sun hit on the dragon starts to move and comes out of the wrapping cloth, and the dragon swallows the snake hunter in one swallow, and the people just scatter away, and the snake also hangs himself to a pole to digest the food, and the bones of the man just gets broken, and the snake gets hung on the pole, and the people scatter and run over each other, and the ones who can't escape also become food for the snake. And they say this snake is a resemblance of the fake sheikhs back in the time. These people have no use for themselves, but they collect people around themselves and they cause their destruction. And Hazreti Mevlana says, the mother of all the idols is your own nefs, and your nefs is a dragon, he says. The river Shad, the large river, is the place where the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers combine. And if you take your nefs as an easy opponent, you are ignorant. And there is an essence in your nefs, in the jail of your nefs, that you shouldn't wake up. And the mind will help you to overcome your nefs. This means you need to tame the nefs. And Hazreti Pir says the nefs is the mother of all the idols. The idols made by the human hands can be snakes, but the nefs is worse than the snakes, and it is an actual dragon. And Hazreti Mevlana tells us the states of nefs with the poetic language, and he defined us the taming of the nefs with the practices. Hazreti Mevlana says the dragon resembles the nefs like a frozen dragon, but once the sun comes up, then the frozen nefs becomes alive. So we have to keep it from the sun of lust. To protect ourselves from the dragons coming alive, we need to keep it under the snow of our control. And as we look at it in terms of methodology, we see most of the stories are similar. Muhlis Koner summarizes us the story, and then he has specifically amended the baits, the couplets that he thinks are difficult to understand. Every sharih, every commentator, every amender has a different style. Based on the numbers of the couplets, they can have different intervals of baits. Their common goal is to make Mesnevi easier to understand. Maybe one of them explains a specific bait in full detail, and some of them can only just translate them and think that this will suffice. And the explanations to the same baits might also differ, and the commentaries that we worked on mostly congregate around the same ideas. They have mostly honored the sharh style, but sometimes took the liberty to change them. The grammatical qualities of the words, the references and prayers might be the areas that they differ. To support their ideas in their commentaries, they can refer to different works from different fields of study. Most all the commentaries take Quran Kerim as the primary resource, also the hadith and the widespread poems from multiple sharihs are also included, and the stories of Hazreti Muhammad, Hazreti Musa, Hazreti Yusuf, Hazreti Dawood, stories, verses, and the words of Hazreti Ali are also included. And apart from the theological and religious topics, they also have references to literary topics as well. And the quotes and the pearls of wisdom and the truth and the knowledge are all separately organized under different titles to make it easier for the reader. And Ankaravi, Tahirül Mevlevi, Bahrül Ulum, Hüseyin bin Hasan Harizmi's words and manuscripts of Cevahirül Esrar are used as
Hazretlerinin sözü,
endnotes to their commentaries. Kaside-i Tahiyye's one couplet is also included. The baits written in 20th century are particular in their not going into grammatical explanations. Gölpınarlı and Tahirül Mevlevi's commentaries are similar, but Şefik Can's commentary differs from them because he separated the story within the story and he didn't go outside of the topics of Mevlana. Muhlis Koner summarized the story and then explained the baits that he thinks are not understood. Gölpınarlı's commentary targets a wider spectrum of readers, and the special names and concepts are explained through encyclopedical information, and that is how it also differs. And the style and the language that the author uses has contributed strongly to Mesnevi commentary tradition. And lastly, Professor Dr. Hijabi Kırlangıç has been translated in poetry, and it is as clear and simple as it can be, being loyal to the original piece of work. I would like to thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gülcan Kuş. That is a story in the 3rd volume. Rumi always puts an emphasis on the battle between nefs and the spirits and the man. So this animal soul, this nefs, is like a monster. So sometimes you see it as frozen, thinking that it's not harmful, but then it may cause some problems, troubles to us. And it's been nicely explained. Thank you very much, Gülcan Koç. So our panels are over today. Yekta, is there anyone you would like to announce? So with all our respect, thank you very much.